Hello, this is Blair Stanislao with the Happy Lion Center. Welcome to our podcast, Mystical and Infamous, where we have playful and easy conversations about anything mystical, getting to the heart of all things strange and weird. Join us in a bit of magical tomfoolery, spreading the alchemy of love and light. And now, we invite you to enjoy the show.
Foundation is everything for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't have a strong foundation, like you were talking about, like entity attachments and stuff, if your vibration's going down, you're more susceptible to those lower energies.
Yeah.
But if you learn that, have that strong foundation and you can bring that up, then you can just go and everybody else's stuff just kind of, it doesn't stick because your energy is strong.
So I just had a hypnosis session yesterday with somebody, and let's see, it was this similar conversation where you're getting grounded or centered or whatever you want to call it, where you're getting aligned and you feel confident in yourself, which is when I teach Reiki, that's the phrase that I use because the word protection has a lot of connotation. Okay. So on some level, to say the word protection, it means that you have a fear of something else, right? Protection, the actual word, is not the best, in a sense, defense.
Yes.
The best defense is to be centered and grounded and know who you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I say with Reiki is like, you're remembering who you are, therefore you get stronger, and that is your protection. It's not necessarily that you're setting up a barrier or not. That's okay. You can set up a barrier too, but by doing that, you're acknowledging that there's a reason to have a barrier, right? So you're giving, in a sense, you're kind of giving your authority over and saying, I'm not sovereign. You said this before. I'm not sovereign over my own being. So therefore I'm going to use this protection. So I think it's a real misnomer. Now, something that's coming in, and I don't really know why, maybe we'll figure it out. I saw this post. There's this amazing woman who I've tried to get her to come on my podcast. She's just busy living life. And I never actually met her. I knew her through a friend of mine. And my friend said, you've got to connect with this person. So I did on social media, but like she lives in Arizona. I've never met her. But her husband is an artist and she makes these posts and she's just like always on the path of this stuff. So she made this post and it was a picture of a mantis. And it looked like the mantis was on like this teal green, I don't know, maybe a wicker chair or something. And it's a really small mantis you can see. And she says she loves having conversations with her daughter because this mantis came up and they said that she is, or the mantis is the color of her celery. So they named the mantis Celery. So they have this conversation and the mantis is all walking around and doing different things while they're having this conversation. And I thought to myself, so I've heard this several times over, especially with people who experience this psychic awareness and they're with people who don't know that, or that it scares them. Especially as a child, I think you experienced that too, where they're psychically aware. And then as a child, because they don't know any better, they say something and then they get shunned, right? So then they spend the rest of their lives kind of overcoming that. Whereas, and I think a lot of the people who are in this, they come to realize that maybe they've had past lives where they shared something like this and essentially they were murdered. And probably murdered in a really terrible way. So you got that ancestral stuff. But I always thought that so I was told that I was a crystal healer in a past life. I've had dreams about them. I've been told in no uncertain terms I'm supposed to use crystals. Do I know how to use crystals? I certainly haven't ever taken a class in them. However, ever since a child, I was one of those kids where my mom we would go on a vacation or something and there would be like that container of rocks that were polished. And I go over to the container. Of course, that made her happy. I know as an adult now, it made her happy because that stuff was cheap, because like, oh, it'd be pretty rocks. And I remember thinking in conversations with people where they're afraid to share that I always say, well, like, it's just really easy to distract them. You just say, oh, I like the pretty rocks. Like it can be really super shallow and be like, you can't argue with that. You know what I mean? Like, do you really want to shun somebody because they like something that's beautiful? Or, you know what I'm saying? And it's like, I've heard phrases where people were talking about, they shared something about their knowledge of the elementals. So fairies or any of that stuff. Right. And then they get shunned and they get shut down. Whereas I'm like, why would you shut any kid down about believing in fairies or seeing I mean, who wouldn't want to be there? Who wouldn't want to see that, right? I don't know. To me, there's some sort of disconnect. If you've got a child who says that stuff, why would you not want to encourage whatever fantastical world, whether it's imaginary or not? Who cares? It's fun. Why would they not want to be there?
See, I think like they say that once a kid hits 7, that's
Mhm.
kind of when it all goes
Yeah.
away. But honestly, it's why would you? I agree with you because like I have a 7-year-old and I see fairies all the time. Like,
Mhm.
and she's always asking me, "Mom, are mermaids real? Mom, is this real? Is this real? Is this real?" And I'm like, "Yeah, even if it's not in our dimension, it still exists. Like,
Mhm.
like it came from somewhere." And so I feel like there's like that mainstream where it's like, oh, we'll be judged. But honestly, more and more people are opening up to it. Like I've had people message me and be like even family members are like, are fairies real?
So they're
You know,
looking for 'em. They want it
yeah.
to be real because it's fun.
Well, and fairies are annoying. Let me tell you, like you get fairies in your house, I'm telling you, they will move your stuff. They will hide it. They will play with it. And but even like my kid, like she's always like, "Mom, I know I was like mermaid in my past life," and she's like, "I'm gonna be a mermaid in my next life." She's like, "I just know," and I'm like, "Yeah, you are probably right." And then
Yeah.
I had at the same time she's telling me this, I actually had somebody else completely different be like, "Are mermaids real?" It's like, what is this? Mermaid land up today?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's
But
a
I think
place in Florida called Weeki Wachee Springs. It's like Source Central something or other. I think it's Central Western. But when I was growing up, so I was born in 77, so that's how old I am. So it must have been like the 80s. Okay. And my father took me there, and I just thought it was the coolest thing. And I think everybody who goes there, I've seen they have a documentary somewhere. Um, Pretty much anybody who's into it, they just adore it. They just like just I don't know why you would take anything like that away from people.
no.
It's kind of like, you like to watch this kind of movie. Why would you tell them it's a bad movie?
Because people want you to be down on their level.
Yes.
They can bring you down. And parents, I am a parent.
Hmm.
Parents are the worst. And I know this might be a little controversial, but like I don't agree with the way that I was raised, right? My
Hmm.
parents, I have the understanding that my parents did the best that they could with the tools that they had. They were quite young. And so now I look at raising my daughter as I didn't like the way that like I look at them, I can analyze from that outside perspective without all the emotions and go, okay, this part I do not agree with. Here's where we're going to change it. So, like for me, parenting, it's very different. And where my daughter and I actually have a relationship, we actually talk, we communicate. We like she shares stuff with me. Like she's very open because I've created that space and that safety where most parents, it's like, you need to listen, do as I say, don't talk out of line, like blah, 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 blah.
Hmm.
There's
Which is
so
why they
many
always
different,
rebel, right?
yeah. And I've been, even the way I raise my kid, I'm like, sometimes she'll have issues with her friend. Hold on. My throat went dry. Even though she'll have issues with her friends, I have to explain to her, I said, look, if you can look at them as no attention or bad attention is better than no attention, and then have that understanding, and this is a 7-year-old kid that I'm telling to like and she absorbs the knowledge and I was like, if you can understand that if bad attention is better than no attention, when these kids are acting out, that should tell you right then and there that they are not being seen, they are not being heard, they're not getting attention at home, and they are being suppressed. But what people want is just to suppress their kids. They want to have kids and then they want them to shut up.
Hmm. Hmm.
Why? But if you can act like the way I approach my parenting is she asks these questions like, are mermaids real? Yes, but in this dimension, here's how it works. She's even asked me, Mom, how do past lives work? Like, because I always talk about it. And so I explain that. So instead of like, I just talk to her like a person where I don't think most people think to do that
Hmm.
because this is just another human, another soul. It's
Yep.
not like, it's like people don't view their children as that. So they want to suppress because if they're miserable, the easiest people to suppress and bring down to their level, even if
Hmm.
it takes years to do it, are their own kids.
Yeah. And okay, so what I'm learning, and I'd love to hear your input on this, is that, as infants, as babies, we come into this world. First off, we're already connected to the mother, meaning we know her we don't know words for them, but we understand her emotions, right? Because they produce chemicals and it doesn't matter. You're just connected. As a baby, you just are aware of that. Then you get born, and then you get exposed to your parents who are usually either male and female, or they have a masculine and feminine energy. And so as an infant, we're experts at realize or recognizing and understanding energies. That does not mean that we can talk about them. Of course, a baby can't talk, right? It doesn't mean that we can know what to do with them. We don't even know what to do with our own bodies, right? So all of this stuff is kind of happening at once. And what I'm learning, especially through the dream interpretation, is that just how smart babies are in terms of reading energy. And so we take the masculine and feminine energies that are presented to us, usually from our parents, and we extrapolate our understanding and our conclusions of those energies, and we put them out on everybody else. So usually if a mother is, let's say that they're what you're talking about, which is you do it my way or you don't do it at all, right? Like you're this control thing. Then you associate that, essentially that's a masculine energy coming from somebody who's supposed to represent the feminine energy. And so you kind of extrapolate that, and you say in your head, oh, this is how the female energy works, which what we're describing there is a masculine energy. So the female energy works with a masculine energy, which is not true. So it's a misalignment with what it is. And then we wind up projecting that everywhere else. And what I want to share the way that it has come up for me. So I'm currently cutting the ties with my mother. So that's supposed to be the feminine representation, right? But my mother also was like that. And it came through in my dreams, and the person analyzing it said, you know, you're seeing the feminine energy, kind of like what we were just talking about, like the coming through is the masculine in a masculine way, but really it should be more feminine, open, relaxed, kind of like you're talking about parenting your daughter. So I'm in the process of recognizing that. And well, what do you do with that? Well, what does that mean? She said, was your mother essentially masculine in this way? And I said, yes. Did she run a tight ship? Basically, it was like, was there order presented by your mother? Yes, there was order presented by my mother. And she said, okay, well, this dream is saying you need to work on that because that's essentially not the feminine energy. And I said, well, what other way is there? Like there's a friend that I have in the group too, and she's a twin. And she said, that's really hard to usually process that kind of stuff. Somebody asked me, what's it like to be a twin? And she says, what's it like to not be a twin? Like you just don't know, you don't know another way. So it's like opening up to a different way. So I kind of think like those energies where I think what happens is if we have parent, and I think that's why people they go this path usually have difficult relationships, or they have difficult home lives or whatever. They have things that are difficult. It's to get you back in tune with your higher self, right? Who you really are. And because when what somebody presents to you is not what the higher self says that the world is, then you start to recognize, okay, that doesn't resonate with me. So then it feels bad. And then you go seeking, right? Like you just know that there's another answer instinctively. So yeah. It's kind of weird how, and she even said something to the effect of, running a tight ship. She said it was exactly what you're talking about, which is if there's a feminine energy who's acting too masculine, or the masculine energy is too strong, it'll be things like kids always sit in the back seat. Kids, are told to be quiet, that kind of thing. And I giggled because even with my husband just a few years ago, as we first started getting together, and he has a daughter, so we'd have kids right in the car and so forth. I was like, well, generally speaking, I always grew up with the adults sat in the front seat. It didn't matter who you were. Adults always sat in the front seat, Yeah.
Was that not how it was with her when you came in?
I don't remember. I think, I don't know. For me, I guess that was challenging my belief system, right? What I understood it to be is that the adults sit in the front seat, but the adults sitting in the front seat and not taking into account if a kid has has input, maybe they have a reason for sitting in the front seat or whatever. And so I think she wanted to sit in the front seat or something, and I didn't, whatever I thought was like, well, this isn't really a legitimate reason, and adults always sit in the front seat. Why would the kids even think that they sit in the front seat? That's me in the close, in a sense, that was me adhering to that belief system that I had created through my mother.
Oh yeah. There's a lot of belief systems like that though. And honestly, like that is one that I do agree with to a degree where it's like, okay, like if they're getting car sick or something like that, like
Yeah.
they need to, but in my opinion, like, yeah, kids sit in the front seat, like if you're going on a trip, generally, yeah, adults want to sit together and sit in the
Yeah,
front.
right. There's some logic. I think it's where it gets blurry. It's like there is some logic to that. And even I don't know when, it's been several years, but at some point they started to recognize the accidents that people were getting into. If the person in the passenger seat weighed less than 100 pounds, they would get much more injured, right? So you don't want to put a kid in the front seat if they're less than 100 pounds. I mean, that's just like a logical thing. That's not like you sit here, you sit there, but it was more about the idea of the child is kind of put in their place in a sense, and that you have this role, and you're not this flourishing young human who has enlightenment or anything like that. But yeah, that I think is definitely an antiquated way of approaching parenting. But everybody
I
has their own.
know most people wouldn't agree probably with the way that I parent or wouldn't understand it because like my daughter and I have a very good relationship. We do communicate a lot and she does know her role, but she is okay to call me out on my
Yeah,
crap. She will
yeah.
call, she is the first person to call me out. Or if like we're having a discussion about something and she's saying, Mom, you're confusing me. Like I don't understand. Like last night we were talking about not taking on other people's stuff because
Hmm.
these little girls that were next door to us, one of them wrote on the cement in chalk, because she left a little bit of her chalk outside, that I hate you, Nyla. And I was like, I got the mom outside and I'm like, look, this is escalating now. And so from the physical point that I looked at it, I was like, okay, I'm done. This is you guys like your kids are like, and they were friends. I'm like, she's excluded from this group. This is what's going on. Like I laid it out into this mother. I was so fed up in a nice way, but I'm like, this is what your children are doing. And I don't think that anything happened from it. Like, I don't think she cared because I don't think they're very connected, right? Like
Hmm.
there's a big disconnect there. That's why negative attention is better than no attention. So then I had to step back and go, okay, like I'm coming from I want to protect my kid. Like my mama bear is coming out. Like I'm
Hmm.
gonna go psycho. But I had to step back and go, okay, Nyla, like what are you creating here? This is where I had to bring the spiritual
Oh yeah.
aspect. As I said, where I was like, what are you wanting? Because at this very moment, the both of us, we both have to take responsibility because I'm trying to protect you and I'm getting my back up and I'm feeding my energy into this because I don't know what to do. And you're creating this because you're so focused on the fact that they hate you and it's being thrown in your face so hard. But I said to her, I was like, you have two paths. I said, now we need to choose. I said, do you want to keep going down this path where you've already like this kid has removed so many things already where she really struggled with over like since we've been here and has come so far. And so it was like I could just see it was these two pathways being presented. And I was like, okay, so you have a choice. You can either keep going down this path and keep having all this hatred. And I said, well, how do you feel about yourself? Like, what do you think of yourself? How do you view you? Because this is a projection of you. Everything that's inside of you is a projection and is outside.
Hmm.
So look at this. You need to like sit back and actually think. And then I said, okay, now look at this other path where now you have all these other friends that are starting to that really like playing with you and you're having a great time. You're enjoying yourself, things are working out for you, like you're expanding a lot, you've really grown. So I said, now you get to choose which way do you want to go. And she's like, well, this one, I like this one, that's with all my new friends and everything's going so good. And I'm like, okay, then we both need to stop feeding our energy into this because together, especially lately, we are creating this. And I said, the universe did you the biggest favor right now because they just wrote that on the sidewalk. You just got shown that this is really
That's
not the
still
path
there.
you want. It's
Yeah.
time to end. And so she was like, okay. And then we were talking last night and she's like, Mom, and I was like, you cannot take responsibility for them writing that on the sidewalk. And she's like, Mom, you just told me that I'm creating this. And now you're telling me that it's not me. I
Well,
can't
it is
take.
confusing. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
I was like, but there's two ways of looking at it. You have to, you're the creator. I said, if you can create all that hatred towards you,
Mhm.
think of all the love you can create. What do you want to create? And that's what I said. Like, there's the difference there. Does not mean that you are responsible for their actions. You do not take that on. And so it's a little confusing, but
It is confusing, but adults go through the same thing, right? Like it's no different. And you're right, it really is genuinely a gift. And of course, I personally think it's really a blessing that she has you to actually say that when she's young, so that she knows when she's older, this becomes an automatic thing. But I kind of find it interesting because it really is the human predicament, like as a whole. We don't understand how can we, okay, we're creating this, but now I want to not create that. And there's a difference between focusing on the not creating of it, which is still focusing on it, right? Or shifting my energy in a way where I'm really focused on doing something that happens to be different, but really what it's doing is distracting my attention from that thing that I don't want to create. So it's funny because my son just graduated this weekend and
wow.
this past weekend, and they had practice for graduation on Thursday, and that was like their last day of school was Wednesday. So Thursday they practiced, so he had stuff to do for school. Then Friday he was off. He didn't have to do anything. Graduation was Saturday. So he made plans with a friend of his to go hiking. So they drive up to the top of the mountain and they go on a hike. And this is actually a pretty well traveled, like it's very popular around here, path. And because it's up higher in elevation, you're going to have a little more snow up there. There's still snow on the top of the mountains. And his friend was walking in front of him. Wasn't any particularly far distance or close distance or anything like that. She was just walking in front of him. And she slipped on ice and she had her water bottle or metal water bottle in her hand and she threw her arm up to balance herself. She didn't even fall, but she threw her arm up and he just happened to be right there. It hit his tooth, broke his tooth. Okay. Now, what I find interesting about this is that he broke his tooth also playing another game. He was playing, like, they call them airsoft, like BB, little plastic BBs. They shoot, the boys get all into this, whatever that is. And but he had orchestrated this whole thing, and we're like 20 people at this thing, and he loves doing it. So it's like a big deal. Like he had really planned this thing out. And they go through the whole maybe it wasn't 20 people that time, but it was some people. And they go through this whole thing, and at the very end, one of them shoots at him. Well, he's smiling. He just got his braces off. Okay. Hits his tooth, broke his other tooth because this was before, this is almost a year before. This is literally like less than a week before school starts. And when school starts, this is his senior year. When school starts, the first day of school, they have school pictures, which doesn't really matter because they weren't actually using that picture. But regardless, he would have a busted out tooth in the picture, right? Well, we were able to get that part at least patched for the picture. But here we are again doing the same thing, literally less than 24 hours before he graduates, he gets his other tooth broken. And what I find really, really interesting about it is, like you were saying, that your daughter is getting shown, like calling to her these people who are not nice to her and saying mean things to her and so forth. And it turns into this manifestation of it being on the street, written in letters that says, I hate you, right? Really horrible, but that's factual. Boom, you can't say that it's not there.
Yeah.
Same thing with him. It's like you have this event happen. Now you've got to have two chipped front teeth. I told him, like, you really got to work on this because you don't have that many teeth. You don't want to, like, and they weren't like breaking off in a piece where you could put it back on. It was like, he said both times they were really shattered. But what he really also recognized on his own was, it could have been anything that was different. Like my face could have been turned. I could have been a step farther back, like anything, but it was just perfect. Luckily, just to hit that one tooth. Matter of fact, he had the color from her water bottle stuck on his tooth for a while. But it's like we have to go to these extremes so that then we start to recognize, oh, there is a pattern here. Oh, there is something that I need to shift that energy. We have to go and say, what is it I'm creating that's causing this to happen?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's different for adults. Like think about adults who are in toxic relationships or they, whatever it is that they're manifesting in their life, they're manifesting it to an extreme to pull them closer to themselves. So they recognize then that they have the power to change things.
I always tell my kid, because my aunt always says this to me, because my aunt's in her 50s. And so she always says, and I'm in my 20s. So she's always like, think of how far you've come where
Mhm.
you are right now. Like you're only 20. I'm gonna be 29 next month. Holy shit. Oh, sorry.
It's
I'm,
okay.
I'm gonna be 29 next month. And I'm like, and she's always like, look, think about how far you've come, and you're only 28. She's in her 50s and she's like, it's taken me this long to get to
Mhm.
this point. And then I look at it and she always says, your children will learn faster than you will.
Mhm.
And these new generations that are being born, like they are very intuitive,
Mhm.
very
And they have
connected.
parents who are saying, listen to your intuition, right? Instead of shut up and be quiet.
But I would say, like, so I even tell my daughter, I'm always like, you're only 7 years old. And you're already at this stage where I'm 28 years old. And I said, I'm now getting that cognate, whatever it's called, but like that realization that, oh, hey, I'm creating this. Hey, this is the universe giving me this sign. Like this is like, yes, it's been the last few years, but it's escalated so much where I can pinpoint it really quickly and catch myself. Where she's 7 years old and I'm right there to help her catch it. So then by the time she's my age, think of the level
Yeah.
that she's going to be on
Yeah.
and so much further ahead.
Teaching, I think I instinctively knew that. So I taught public school for like 9+ years. And I remember thinking that same thing. So I was not of so I wasn't so much older than them that I completely disconnected. Like, generationally, people usually have a hard time with their parents, but definitely their parents' generation is what I mean. But also even farther sometimes is the grandparents' generation. Like they just don't connect at all. The kids don't get, like, even my husband and I, we do struggle some with the way the kids actually schedule things because when we were young, you had to schedule things in advance. Like the person organizing it had all the details. It was written on a piece of paper. You handed it to your parent. You also knew all the information. The kids now, they're like, oh, I have this thing I have to go to. What time is it? I think it's about this time. And when are you going to do it? When it's going to be over? Oh, I don't know. Like they're just totally cool with that. There's all factors into that. Anyways, there's that disconnect between the generations. And when I was a teacher, I didn't have all that disconnect in the sense that I understood where the kids were coming from. And I did see them as little humans, which makes it fun. So I didn't have that relationship with them that was that sit in your chair and be quiet kind of thing. Um, but it's crazy how just that little bit of leeway and a little bit of understanding opens the door because I didn't have a whole lot of behavioral problems. I mean, I can't say I never wrote a referral, but I didn't write more than 10 referrals in 10 years. Okay. And there's some people who write referrals like every day, right? And a referral is basically you get sent to the principal's office and you have a consequence. But yeah, there's
Never.
that leeway, that transition between where are you and how are you going to shift into this new frequency. Another thing I wanted to add is I wanted to share, you talked about how far you have come in this time period and how far your daughter is already. I mean, I think probably parents of children now also feel the same. I just want to share with the listeners, there really needs to be, in all honesty, I think that it would be better to have no judgment of where you are personally. Of course, it helps also not to have judgment of other people, but we're mostly concerned with ourselves. And I say that, and so I want to share something that came up that I was like, holy crap, I can't believe this. So in the dream interpretation, the first one I got analyzed, or not the first one, this was a little while into it, but I had a dream about a celebration, which is supposed to be a birth dream. And so I'm late to the celebration. That's not good in your dream. And people were opening, there were kids and an adult, I think it was a husband. The kids were opening presents. Then we decided to put the presents away. So we go into this room to put the presents away. And I have in my hand a toy that's something that they opened. And I was like, what is this thing? Is that an alligator or is it like a dinosaur? And so I was like looking at it, twisting it all upside down, and all that. And the person doing the dream interpretation, she says, the first thing she said was, did your parents know you were going to be a boy? And I said, no, not in 1977. They did not. But then I remembered also for years, for my whole life, they always said they thought I was going to be a boy. I don't even know what I just said if I said that wrong. Anyways, they always said we thought you were going to be a boy because you were so active in the womb compared to my older sister. Okay, so they thought I was going to be a boy. So the dream itself was actually saying that's how I felt on the day I was born. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like a boy.
Right? I felt like they were like picking me up like the stuffed animal, examining me like, is this really what you are? I don't know what you are. And as I felt into that, so first I was like, okay, whatever. That's kind of weird, right? But then as I felt into it, I started to recognize, yeah, I probably did feel that way. And of course, it was reiterated through the years, but I definitely felt that way. And that's the key where you recognize, okay, so I'm 46 and I'm having a dream about my birth that I haven't addressed those responses, right? So exactly what you're saying about how far you come and how far your daughter has come, right?
Mhm.
They get to skip some of that because we're more open to encouraging them to connect, right? With
Yeah.
spirit. But everybody has got whatever their life is, they've got things that kind of hold them back, and that's their plight. Like it's not a bad or a good thing, it's just a thing.
Mhm. You choose what you're going to go through before you even come.
Yeah.
But like for my daughter, like I always say, like I know because she's always like, Mom, I'm so grateful you're my mom all the time. She says it to me daily, multiple times a day sometimes. She's
Mhm.
just so grateful because I encourage her to be herself. But I watch her and she's like, Mom, I'm not psychic like you are. And I'm like, because I had a psychic tell me when she was 1 years old, like maybe a little bit before that, that she has all my same gifts. And I was a very, very, very psychic child. Still am very, very, very psychic. And so I was like, yeah, you are. But I see it. The difference I watch is because like when I grew up, it was all the dark, all the dark. Like I thought I was evil growing up because of what I could do and
Mhm.
like the things that would move and all the things that would happen. And she doesn't have those same experiences because I've learned, I've grown, I know how to protect my space. I feel like once you get to a certain point, you have this energy of that's just no longer allowed in my space. It's not a thing that exists here. And if
Mhm.
something does walk through, then it's on a little bit higher of a vibration because nothing low is allowed. It's just like an automatic knowing where I'm not trying to focus on, oh, I have to protect, I got to do all this stuff. And like you still do that before you do like channeling and stuff. So it is done, but the focus is different. So my house is always clear. I check into me, like I can tell when she brings someone home from school, like if someone's like hooked into her energy, we clear it off. She knows how to use the tools to do it. She knows how to. And so watching her, she's like, Mom, I'm not psychic. And I will watch her, she'll breathe somebody and not know she's doing
Yep.
it.
Yep.
And then they get frustrated with her because they're like, oh, I didn't say that and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, Mom, they don't like me, or Mom, this. And I'm like, that's because you're reading them because she tells me all the time, I'm not psychic like you are. I can't
Yep.
do it. I don't see anything. And I was like, because I keep this space clear. You are protected. You're not having to protect yourself constantly and always be on guard. You get to just be. There's a huge difference from what I grew up having to always be on guard because, okay, what's going to be hovering over my bed? What's going to be happening versus what she experiences now to it being just a natural, normal thing. So it comes through when it needs to, or when she feels like, like whatever it is that happens. So it's very different and it's more natural for her versus.
Well, having started this channeling course, and I was really excited to do it, but doing this channeling course and recognizing, oh, wait, I've been doing this literally my whole life. Didn't know it, didn't have the words for it, right? Um, I kind of, I kind of wonder if like, I was just looking up as you were talking, the definition of psychic. Okay, so it says relating to or denoting faculties or phenomena that are apparently inexplicable by natural laws. And then the next definition is relating to the soul or mind. Okay, so just by our definition, that are apparently inexplicable, right? That just means that the collective is not, and I don't mean the real collective, I mean the 3D collective. Like there's
Okay.
not this like mainstream sort of, right? The mainstream doesn't acknowledge that there's some other way of getting this information. Well, so now we're kind of evolving into, as a society, we're evolving into that space where we're starting to recognize, yeah, there is a way to get information that's not through the five senses,
Yeah.
right? So I think there's more acceptance of it. So to say I'm not psychic, I would assume that in a child's mind, that translates more. And I think, I mean, I would say consistently what I have heard, you use the word psychic. People immediately, generally, people will honestly get very defensive because they don't understand it or they get scared, right? Like, oh, it's that weird stuff. And actually I've had multiple times where people say the word witch, right? There's a book. I bought a book, right? That says something about being a witch or whatever. I don't know that I would have even bought that 10 years ago, but I buy it now and I'm like, oh, that's just a word. Like whatever you want to call it, it doesn't really matter what it is. Of course, if you get into the book, then you recognize, oh, it's just spiritual practices connecting with that, the energies that you can't necessarily see or measure with the tools that we have. So what I'm saying is like the word psychic itself has so many connotations. It's very similar to that word protection. There's so many connotations to it, or use the word witch, whatever you want to call it, that are not really indicative of what it really is because people don't get it. So there's all that fear associated with those things that doesn't really have to be there. Whereas if they really understood the energy, it wouldn't be quite so fearful.
I agree.
Yeah.
I don't think it is scary, but I feel like the more you get into this, like this community, there's so many people.
Mm-hmm.
Like for me, like me going to the store is the closest I get to normal.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like it's just not in my reality. Like there's so much where people are like, oh, spiritual people are so hard to find. I'm like, really? They're everywhere I turn. Just because that's
Yeah,
my
it is. Well, okay, so the occult thing, right? Like so psychic goes into the category of the occult. So occult just means hidden knowledge, which of course is another word that scares people, but basically it just means hidden knowledge, right? Okay, so I find that really interesting because I know exactly what you're talking about. And I've actually shifted, probably largely due to my widowhood, but I've actually shifted into if I'm talking with one of us, these kind of people, you can talk freely, right? Like, you get it, it's easy, then you're not going to get shunned or, sent to the insane asylum or anything. And then sometimes you're not. And
Mhm.
I just call them normies. I mean, that was a phrase that I heard related to the widow life because becoming a widow, your mind just expands in a different way. You're going through this trauma. Sometimes people really associate with it. It doesn't matter. Collectively, overall, if you experience loss of someone really close to you, whether it's your spouse or not, you kind of get to that place where you're kind of forced to connect with spirit. And so, and then you also are dealing with your humanness. And so, what does your humanness cause you to do? Because we all do different things that sometimes even we know on a higher level, we don't really have to do this, but yet we do it. There's a reason we have a drive for it. And that's just part of being human. So there's an acceptance of being human. But then there's that distinct difference between when you're aware of both of those kind of I don't know what you call it, basically modes of being, that they're there together at the same time. Whereas previous to your trauma, you don't have that awareness.
Yeah.
Everything is just this reality that's here.
Well, yeah, I would say like you gotta go down. You have to in order to go up more, to learn more, because if we were always in that same state, you're never going to want something better, want something new. You're never going to experience what you really are there to experience.
Yeah. Yep. And that goes back to the thread where you got, I don't know if we recorded that or not, but the thread where it's like, if your heart coherence or your frequencies are going down and, having dips and then going up really high, you have that discrepancy where it's not quite as strong of a wave pattern. And when it goes down is when you're able to connect to, yes, you start to recognize the lower frequencies, but then by recognizing them, you can also choose to focus somewhere else, which is what your daughter did.
Yeah.
Go
Well,
back up.
even in that, it's okay. Every time you go down, the one thing I learned recently, like this last year, has been okay. I keep hitting these down cycles where I feel like I'm hitting rock bottom over and over and over. Every time I hit it, it was like, okay, I surrender that because I don't know what to do. Obviously, that was a path that I was choosing to go on. And this is where it led me to rock bottom. It's not working. So now I need a new path opened up. And that was when I had to actually like surrender to the universe, God, whatever you want to call it. That's where I was like, okay, I take this off me and I give it to you now because I don't know. And every time I would do that, it was like this new path would open. And then all of a sudden I'm shooting back up in a new way. And then it was like, okay, now we're going to drop back down. And I'm going, what the heck? But I learned what I needed to learn. So then when I went back up again, it was like that next thing. And it kept happening because it needed to play out to get me to where I needed to be. And that's how it works with people. It's like, if you're not going to hit the rock bottom, how are you supposed to get to the new path, the new life that you're manifesting?
And then as we go through it, which I think is what the young people of today are really learning when they have parents who say things like you have said, is that when you learn to recognize this shift, wherever this shift is, before you hit that rock bottom and you make the adjustment, it's not that you have to go all the way to the bottom. It's learning to recognize that energy as it shifts. And then when you notice it, then make your shift so that you can then go back up, right? So then it becomes less dramatic and it becomes more consistent.
Yes, because you have what I call a new layer, like a new minimum layer, a new minimum level. So then your rock bottom that used to be way down there is now a lot higher, and then it gets a little higher each time. So it's still hitting that rock bottom,
Right.
but it's at a new level. You no longer are new minimum standard. You no longer have that standard for what you used to have. You yourself have grown. You're no longer willing to put up with that. So you're still going to hit that rock bottom for the new version of you. And then you got to shoot back up.
Which makes that higher point even higher. Yeah. Send inquiries, suggestions for new discussion topics, and comments to podcast@happylioncenter.com. That's podcast@happylioncenter.com. If you found this content enjoyable or helpful, please comment, like, share, and download. Donations are appreciated and help us to produce more of similar content. Consider making a contribution at the links in the description box. Your support is greatly appreciated. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Happy Lion Center and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, individual, or anyone or anything. None of the content provided should be considered a substitute for legal, financial, medical, psychiatric advice or as care from a certified professional.